I've never seen the city trim more trees and shrubbery and landscaping on neutral grounds.
It's amazing how many stop signs you can see now.
Oh, there's stop signs all of a sudden, right? We're simultaneously glad it's happening, but we're angry it took the Super Bowl for it to finally happen.
You know, the Super Bowl is February 9th. What does this look like on February 10th?
Taylor Swift was a test run. I've never seen downtown cleaner than I ever have before.
People that were in the process of being housed have now been displaced.
And you cannot get rid of their belongings. We're not blind and oblivious to this. If you drop that ball 2 weeks, it's done.
It's over. Hey guys, real quick, before we get into it, do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. That way you don't miss out on any of the tea. Thanks. Hi, Charles.
Hi, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing well. How does it feel to be back for season 2?
Look, I'm gonna be honest, I'm super excited for this. You know, I think season 1 was a good test run, and we've received great feedback.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think our fans want more.
Yes.
So we're gonna give them
and
more.
We're gonna give them more.
So I'm really excited to dive into these topics, some of which we'll be revisiting, some new ones. And I think we're kind of getting a handle on where we're going with this and what we're trying to do and accomplish. And I'm just generally very excited.
Likewise. I've been really excited for the feedback we've gotten. I'm looking forward to the feedback we'll get on this season.
Yes.
Before we jump in, I want to remind folks that all of season 1 and our Pop-In interview series are all available on streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. So definitely check it out because I think we're going to reference a couple things that we've discussed previously as we move through the exciting topics we have for season 2.
Absolutely.
So you ready to jump in?
Let's just jump right in.
We're
girl.
jumping right in to one of our favorite topics.
Yes.
I think it's really fitting that we are, exactly 3 months to the
We're
day
less than 100 days
out from
the
Super Bowl. So what are we doing in New Orleans regarding Super Bowl prep?
So, you know, we started talking about this in season 1, and I think it's important to kind of just list everything that's happening right now, right? And for those who live in New Orleans right now, you can start to see these projects come to fruition.
Absolutely.
And it's really interesting, right? So I want to kind of just start off with what's happening. And the first one is infrastructure. It doesn't matter where in the city you are, there's infrastructure projects everywhere. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? While we are, to state the obvious, and this has been talked about in the city a lot, is we're simultaneously glad it's happening, but we're angry it took the Super Bowl for it to finally happen.
Well, also, too, the pressure of having everything happen at once,
Yes,
right?
all at once.
It's like, it's improvements, it's repairs, it's, new things. All of these things, like every street in New Orleans is under construction, it's torn up, and it's like, okay, yeah, I want these improvements, but like, I also...
The coordination was a little bad. And, the epicenter of all of this is downtown. Right? So downtown, the CBD, the French Quarter, the Warehouse District, because that's all within that immediate radius of the Super Bowl, right, at the Superdome. And to your point, right, sure, it's great that we're doing all these street projects downtown, but when you're doing it from one end to the other, we're all bottlenecked in it.
Everywhere. Yeah.
So it's just a disaster. But it's good. So again, it's like I said, this double-edged sword.
Yeah.
So
beggars can't be choosers.
Right.
So we're just gonna grin and bear it.
As an urbanist, I don't ever take the same route to work, and I deliberately drive through different places to monitor the progress. And I just want to list some things. I have never seen the city pressure wash more streets and exits of the interstate than I ever have. It is magical that all the lights on the interstates are now back up, including through the east, from the airport in Jefferson Parish to the city. I've never seen the city trim more trees and shrubbery and landscaping on neutral grounds.
It's amazing how many stop signs you can
Oh,
see
there's
now.
stop signs all of a sudden, right? And, all of a sudden, these streets where we had to guess the street lines are now painted street lines. Who would have known?
Imagine that. This is actually a 2-lane street.
Yes. And, right, exactly. And Poydras, right? Like, the main quarter downtown it's beautiful now if you see it. And again, it's like, great, we see it. And I know that deep down, these will be long-term benefits. But the frustration of how we got here is a little infuriating. Other projects of importance is beautification efforts. Yeah. Right. So the city, for instance, announced last week that every major city-owned building will be pressure washed downtown. So we are quite literally putting our best foot forward. Right. There's murals being painted on buildings, pocket parks being built, just an overall beautification. And what I saw this tweet a few weeks ago that really stuck with me. This woman who lived, I think, somewhere downtown tweeted, "This is all of a tease. because it's a tease because it reveals that we actually can do this stuff.
Right.
And as people who live here, it's frustrating that we are doing this really
for other people.
Correct, right?
We're doing this
and
for people coming in rather than doing it for the people that live here.
Yes.
And so again, like you said, it's that double-edged sword of it's great to have this. We are so excited to have these things. You mean you're going to put up a like food truck plaza right
I drove past
by
on
the arena?
Stunning already.
And there's not much there yet, and it's still already such a huge improvement over what has been there for decades. But yeah, it's for everyone but
where was
us.
This for years?
It's for everyone but us. And so that is a little bit of a slap in the face. But I think what's important is looking at how we as residents continue to support these things beyond the Super Bowl to ensure that the city continues and the state continues to invest in this sort of improvements and maintaining these things, right? Because I think on top of why did it take so long is, the Super Bowl is February 9th. What does this look like on February 10th?
Exactly.
What does this look like on July 10th? As we move away from, kind of this core key event, what is going to happen in the city to ensure that these things don't turn into what they were before?
And, I want to share a quick story. Taylor Swift was a test run.
Absolutely.
Right, in many ways. And I had a friend who is from here, childhood from elementary school, and she came for the concert, and we had a conversation that was very revealing to me. Because she's from here, right? And she knows what the city, the dysfunction that we all hate, but whatever. And she goes, Charles, I've never seen downtown cleaner than I ever have before. I've never felt safer than I ever have before. Just the image of the city, right? And this test run. And her question, and she was here with a bunch of friends who also had the same kind of agreement with her. And her question to me was, will this last after the Super Bowl? Right? It's a cynicism that we rightfully have, right? Because we've been disappointed so many times. And I told her that there is something inside me that does believe that we have kind of figured this out. And we've talked about this. I have a lot of respect for Michael Heck, who's been appointed by the governor to lead this. They have weekly meetings every Monday. And he has brought together people and entities and agencies that have operated in silos for decades. And they're all on the same page now. And in every interview that he's in, everything that I read about him, he makes it an explicit point to say that the day after the Super Bowl, we will continue these weekly Monday meetings. That suggests to me there's no reason not to do that. Like, why would you stop? It seems like he's figured out the missing piece of the puzzle, and it's working, and we're getting even accolades from the governor, which speaks volumes. So why would this stop? I don't see a reason why this would stop. Are you in agreement that we finally have figured it out, or we're going to revert back to our old ways after the Super Bowl? Or is this wishful thinking?
Ask me that question on March 15th.
Okay. I think that's fair.
I think that we are seeing a real shift in New Orleans. I think this kind of like falls in line with some of what we discussed last season with downtown development, things like the River District. There is this desire to, I think, really see a shift and a change in the city. And having the Super Bowl come and sort of like, push this invigoration into that process, I think is really helpful in galvanizing that and hopefully seeing that continue forward. But I've been here a long time and I'm very skeptical. So I always have, I think, a healthy bit of doubt when we say this is going to continue and move forward, right? This isn't the first Super Bowl that New Orleans has hosted.
Exactly.
And we've kind of seen these, Band-Aids and these little spit shines that happen when it comes. I do think that this go-around feels very different because it is happening in conjunction with so much other change and so much other desire for change within the city. I'm hoping that we do see it move forward. But again, I've got a healthy bit of skepticism.
I agree. And, I want to point out some kind of an interesting example of this, and this idea that we are actually something that's different about this Super Bowl versus all the prior is that we're putting into effect permanent infrastructure changes that is actually altering the landscape of the city, which kind of leads to a big part of all this, which is the homeless camps.
Yes.
Right. So before we even get into the actual meat and potatoes of the homeless camp, it's important to look at the geography of this, right?
Yes.
So the majority of, and now I want to be clear for everybody, right? Homelessness exploded in America after the pandemic in every city. including cities that have never had this problem.
Yeah.
One that comes to mind is Denver. It exploded in that city that never had it, right? And what's interesting is that, prior to the pandemic, homelessness was often viewed as just an urban big city problem. It's now an everywhere problem. And
Yes.
that's now why we're seeing these national discussions from big cities to mid-sized cities and small towns of solutions to this, okay? When you look at the distribution of the homelessness, it is concentrated in downtown, in the CBD, primarily under both the Calliope Interstate and the North Claiborne Interstate.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where they've been concentrated. And then obviously some pockets in the French Quarter and the CBD. But again, majority that visibility that we see were these camps. And the city 2 years ago was awarded a $30 million federal grant from HUD to implement a long-term solution to these homeless camps, to put them in housing, to get them casework, to get their lives back on track, kind of a holistic approach to this, right?
Yes.
And what was interesting is that it's been very targeted. So the first camp they dismantled was Chapatulas, which was arguably the most visible, the biggest, and there was very rational reasons of why there, right? It's by the convention center, it's by kind of the epicenter of the economic part of the city, and then they switched to North Claiborne, so kind of Treme in that area. And this all led up to the Taylor Swift concert, which was the last remaining big camp, which was by Loyola Avenue by the Superdome.
Right.
Now, what we saw with the first two camps, Chapatulas and Claiborne, was not only did they relocate all of the unhoused, they dramatically transformed the surroundings of which the camps were. There's now permanent fencing, new landscaping, even what we call hostile architectural landscaping. So rocks, plants, aesthetically it looks great. So when you get off of the exits, it's a whole new vibe, energy, and like the aesthetic urbanism likes that. And on Claiborne also, all this new landscaping, which is part of a larger project of like revitalizing Claiborne, the corridor and everything. It just has led to a lot of the human component that has been forgotten about this.
Yeah, and I think to
right?
talk
And we
about
saw this with Taylor Swift.
the human component before we get into what happened, right before the Taylor Swift concerts, to really put some numbers around this, right? So the city's goal was by the end of 2025 to provide services and permanent placement for 1,500 people. Where we are as of September of this year is 555 people have been housed. Out of that 555, 166 of those people have come from these permanent encampments that were, or not permanent, but long-term encampments that were under Tchoupitoulas and North Claiborne. And so I think it's really important to put those numbers around that, right? Like this isn't just, hey, they got a grant and they say they're going to do some work, right? We know that 555 people who did not have housing before have housing now, and that this was an ongoing initiative within the city to actually come up with a permanent solution for these individuals. And then we saw some shift happen right before
in a
the
very
Taylor Swift
dramatic,
concerts.
quick way, abrupt way.
Yeah, and so what was that?
So what happened? My students in my Intro to Cities class, we talked about this, right? What ended up happening. And I told them I don't necessarily think that this was an intentionally malevolent thing from the state.
Right.
I think what ended up happening was this came down to terrible timing. So when you look at the first two camps, and the city has what we effectively had like a homeless czar. He's the guy, and interesting, he was homeless himself, so he has direct experience with this, and he's been coordinating this with interagencies or whatever. And it takes a lot of trust to help the unhoused to believe that they're going to get help. Right. This isn't a one-time off thing. It doesn't take a day. It takes a long time to build this relationship.
And it's not as simple as you go to an encampment and say, here's the keys to your apartment, right? This is an ongoing process. It requires, multiple different agencies. It requires multiple different types of professionals, social workers, and, different professionals that are aiding in this process. It also requires paperwork. So, the solution isn't as simple as just walking down to these encampments and handing out keys and saying, oh, here's your new apartment, off you go. Can you talk a little bit about specifically what happened with the governor and the encampments leading up to Taylor Swift?
Yeah. So like about a week before the Taylor Swift concert started, the governor came out with an announcement saying that we're going to sweep out this final encampment, right? And then Leslie Harris, the council who represented the district came out saying, "What are you doing? You're going to mess up everything that we've been doing for months." And they're going to be housed by Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
That timing was everything.
Yeah.
Right? That 3-week gap is what led the governor to do what he had to do. And what he did was he just shifted them down a few blocks to where they were no longer in sight of that radius from the Superdome, right? And so the damage had been done.
Right.
Okay, so some got scattered, and the people who kind of have been leading this effort, Nathaniel Fields, the homelessness czar, the other agencies throughout the city that deal with housing, were like, you just disrupted all of this, right? And what got really interesting was the state courts got involved, saying that they put like a short moratorium on this. You have to give 24-hour notice, and you cannot get rid of their belongings, which leads into the human component of all of this.
Absolutely.
Right? So we want to talk about that part.
Yeah. I think that is one thing that's really critical about this, right? It isn't just as simple as, the encampment was here and we just moved it up 2 or 3 blocks, right? We know things were thrown away, people's belongings, their tents, important paperwork, and also just that shift up, even though it's not that far geographically, people that were in the process of being housed have now been displaced. The city workers that were working with them to find them housing now are no longer to locate them. You've had this erosion of trust, right?
Yes.
The time that it takes to build up the trust amongst the homeless population and people that are being impacted by this, to say, these folks that keep coming down here saying, we're going to get your housing, we're going to get you placed, really are going to do what they say they're going to do. A lot of that has been just eroded away with this. ProPublica just recently did a series called Swept Away, where they talk to people who've been impacted by encampment sweeps across the country. And they ask them to write on note paper the most important thing that they lost in a sweep.
Oh, wow.
And it is really, really painful to read some of these. Some of it is, as simple as, or not as simple, but, things like ID, birth certificate, passport, all this paperwork and things that they need for exactly what everyone is saying to do. Get housing, get a job.
Exactly, right.
You can't do that without those critical components, right? But you also see where they write things about, a woman wrote that her husband's ashes were thrown out. Very important, critical components of someone's life that's irreplaceable, that they can't get back, that, are now gone forever. In addition, in this series, they also went to some of these cities and reviewed the logs where they've stored some of the things that have been captured in a sweep. And the little components of people's lives, the things that we take for granted every day, that now sit in a log with, other people's belongings and no way to identify, who it belongs to. The flags that veterans had from their service that they've carried with them through being unhoused, photographs, and all of these things that are all that these people have in this world, and it's being torn from them. So that, I think, is one of the saddest parts of when we talk about this particular issue is we always talk about the economic impact, the visual impact, but we forget that we're talking about humans. People in our community, our neighbors that are in desperate need of being housed, and what activities like this encampment sweep actually mean on a personal level.
Now, remember, this is also coming off the heels of the Supreme Court ruling in the summer that this now gives full nationwide leeway for cities to do this. Right? So there is no longer a legal world where you can't do that. Right? Which, begs the question whether it's New Orleans for Taylor Swift for the Super Bowl or any city, that we both have these short-term solutions. Like, great, this grant is awesome. It's for 3 years. But what are some long-term solutions, right?
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, like I tell my students, it's housing. We need more housing. It's a supply and demand thing. You need to build more housing. There should be no vacant lots. We need to incentivize, which is great, by the way.
Well, we need more housing, but we need more keyword affordable
housing, right? Which I'm about to say. I'm very happy that the city in this past week voted to create that 2% allocation of the general fund to sustain and develop a mechanism to have permanent funding for housing. So that's a great root cause solution to all of this. I don't really want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but another question is when the unhoused gets their housing vouchers, where are they going?
Right.
And the short-term answer is the outskirts, Algiers, New Orleans East. But that's another conversation for another day.
Yeah.
Right? So there's just so many things going on with this. Created a very highly emotional reaction from everybody, from multiple, whether it's homeowners who live right next to the camp, the people themselves in the camp, the politicians at the local and state level. And it's not going to go away, right? I mean, this camp that got shifted, at the end of the day, they still are going to, the Super Bowl is going to kick them out one way or another, right? It's just kind of delaying the inevitable. But I don't want us to lose sight of that human, just have a little bit of compassion.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, a little bit of compassion goes a really long way.
Exactly.
Last season we did have an episode where we talked about the governor and New Orleans specifically, and some of his initiatives around New Orleans and Troop NOLA, which is the Louisiana State Police troop that is dedicated to the city of New Orleans and led this effort, is one of those things we discussed more so from a crime standpoint last season. But one of the things we talked about is, what does the governor's long-term initiatives for the city look like? What does that mean? And we're starting to see some of that transpire, right? Of the city had a plan for this, and the governor came in and usurped. And right, wrong, or indifferent, how are we balancing these initiatives? How are we balancing these different stakeholders and making sure we're doing what's best for all of the citizens of the city? And I think going forward, it is going to be really interesting to see how more of these types of things start to play out when we get closer and closer to the Super Bowl, especially. Are we going to see more of that heavy hand from Baton Rouge coming down and saying, no, this is how we're going to do things? So any final thoughts on overall Super Bowl prep as we move
thoughts
forward?
are there's a lot going on here, but again, it goes back to this dual-edged sword. Am I thrilled that all these infrastructure projects are happening? Absolutely. It's going to be a great long-term investment. The city looks, it just looks better than it ever has. If you know what the city is, right? I just truly hope deep down that we find it in us to continue this after the Super Bowl. And this is a chance to, in my opinion, reverse course and create like a paradigm shift between the relationship of citizens and our policymakers and our politicians, to rebuild trust. If y'all can, in fact, continue this after the Super Bowl, that will speak volumes.
Absolutely.
If y'all drop the ball within even 1 month, even 1 week of the Super Bowl,
you've eroded all that good faith.
If this is really interesting to me. I did, because I'm on the Super Bowl committee, right? And so I've been attending these monthly meetings. It's small. It's like 50 people, business owners. Michael Heck leads the meeting. And what was really interesting was he said in the 2 to 3 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl will be a very deep cleanse of the city. Already what we're seeing, but even in triple,
even more so.
Those sweep machines, right? Just cleaning up everything.
Yeah, ramp up.
Great. Awesome. I want to see that in the 2 weeks after the Super Bowl. If you do not do that, because let's be very clear here, we all see what's happening. We're not blind and oblivious to this. If you drop that ball 2 weeks, it's done.
It's over.
Right? And we're watching y'all. And I really hope that we figure it out and continue this momentum.
So one last question for you, Charles.
Oh, gosh, yes. Okay.
Are the Saints going to play at home in this
girl? No. Wah, wah. Now, does the Superdome look great? Yeah. I heard from Swifties, right? The inside looks amazing.
Really great renovations have been done there,
But the Saints this season, not so much.
Okay, well, we'll continue to pray on that one.
We'll continue that conversation.
Well, Charles, this has been a really great conversation and a great start to season 2.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see where this all goes, right? And, obviously we'll update everybody as the Super Bowl prep continues. So
absolutely.
All right.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Pelican Briefs.
If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
If you are loving the show, you can help us keep the conversation going by supporting us on Patreon.
Your contribution on Patreon ensures we can continue producing quality content you love.
Click the link in the description to become a patron today.
Until next time, This is Pelican Briefs.